Jesus says, I'm not erasing the law, as Paul said he did. I'm fulfilling it. Now that's different. Does that mean Jews shouldn't keep kosher laws, Sabbath laws, and be ethical people? No. You continue to do it. And Christians who may not do the Sabbath and the kosher will also have their rules to live by, ethical and spiritual and moral rules, and that's absolutely necessary to make the effort toward salvation. Paul said the opposite. You have really two different views here of Christianity. Well, it shouldn't surprise you. We have so many different churches within a mile and a half of where we're sitting. More than 100 churches. And some of them are Pauline and some of them are not. So there we are. This church believes in good deeds and good works. It's very important in the St. Stephen's notion of what it means to be a Christian. There are Christian churches where they would say that's absolutely untrue. It's all faith. But if you have enough faith, then good deeds will just flow from you. Paul doesn't say you shouldn't do them, but you should do them as a consequence of the change of heart. So the interesting psychological question is, does good motivation lead to good action, which Paul says it does, or does good action habituate us until we have good motivation, as the Jews say? Which comes first? It's one of those chicken and egg questions, and I don't know that one is right or one is wrong. They're both very interesting. And I think there are times when each one works. Sometimes we have to strive for a totally new attitude, and sometimes for a totally new code of conduct. And in fact, here he's saying both. Yes, sir.
A question, because he said at first that this is kind of how people of faith treat other people of faith. Don't put your pearls in front of the swine. But then the one about the eye and the lamp of the body. Now, what about someone who is a Satanist?
A
Satanist.
Satanist, yes.
No belief in God. Satanist.
Yes, yes. There are, I suppose, such people, yes.
He was the first mark, sort of, they started his own creation.
Right, right.
Like Saul and so are Christians supposed to treat him the same way as they would treat another, or as not a Christian, but are we as believers in the faith
Yes.
supposed to treat him the same way, or
No.
we would not be throwing our pearls in front of swine?
You would be. That's exactly my point. That this is a collection of admonitions to the religious community, in this case Christians. Turn the other cheek. That's for one Christian and another Christian. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Jesus has elsewhere used the idea that the consciousness of God is the pearl of great price. It doesn't work with people outside the community all the time. Now, he's not saying don't be kind to people who aren't Christians, but he's saying this kind of intense insistence on never striking back if you're struck and forgiving everyone. It works in a shared community a community of shared value. But I've used the example of Satanists, and there are such people. Some of them broke into our family mausoleum on Long Island and took my aunt's bones and built a fire. It was horrible. They're nutty, crazy people. But more likely than Satanists in the modern age, you have communists and Nazis and people who really believe in tyranny, really evil people. I won't mention a current candidate. And yeah. Bernie is a saint. All right. Now, so what Jesus means is, I'm not confusing myself with Jesus. What Jesus means, I think, is illustrated by this story, and I've told this story here. Mahatma Gandhi freed India from England. He was in jail, and he was called in by the Viceroy, the English Viceroy, and he said, Mr. Gandhi, we don't actually want to keep you in prison, you know, but you keep agitating among your people. Do you really think that Her Majesty the Queen, or in that case the King, is going just to have his army and his people walk out of India, which is the greatest jewel in the crown of the British Empire? And he said, oh yes, that is exactly what you're going to do. Well, how do you expect that you're going to get us to leave after hundreds of years? I will force you to do things to stay which your British conscience will not allow you to do. Your Christian conscience will not allow you to do it. And so here's a Hindu instructing the viceroy on Christianity. And this is what he did. He left the office of the viceroy, and they did free him. And he told everyone, I want you next Monday to lie down on the tracks, the railroad tracks. It was the system of trains that held together the entire British Empire, especially India. And on that day, they all went down and they lay on the tracks. And of course, the English couldn't give an order for the trains to run over thousands of people because of Christian conscience, because they're British. And you don't do that. Well, in Ireland, they did almost that, but somehow the Irish situation brought out the worst in the English, and they're horrifying. But in India, they just wouldn't do it. And ultimately, they walked out of India because they wouldn't do the horrible things they would have to do to keep India. So Gandhi read their conscience correctly. And then he read about how the Nazis were persecuting Jews. And he wrote a letter to Leo Baeck, the great chief rabbi of Berlin, and he said, Dear Rabbi, my heart is moved by the suffering of your people. Let me tell you how we did it here. And this is what I suggest. Have a few Jews go to the center of Berlin and set themselves on fire, sacrifice themselves, and the Nazis' conscience will be so moved by this act that they will stop persecuting the Jews. And Rabbi Baeck wrote back, he said, Dear Mr. Gandhi, I admire you so much, you're the conscience of the world, but we're not dealing with the British. We're dealing with Nazis who would be only delighted to have Jews all burn themselves, then it saves them the fuel, they don't have to do it. You don't understand. It doesn't work with these people. I don't think Gandhi did understand. This is for believing people. Turn the other cheek when we're dealing with Putin would be insane. So don't cast your pearls before swine. People outside the community, actively evil people, and there are such people, or people who for some reason have given themselves over to evil, you've got to be heavily armed, folks. The Christian warrior has a place too. And if we're having a war with terrorists, we've got to fight back. We can't just let them walk all over us and kill our people. So, your question's great. This is for the internal community of believers. It works. I've tried, it does work, but there must be a shared sense of morality for people who have rejected that whole system. And Hitler consciously rejected the Judeo-Christian tradition. And he was making war on 4,000 years of moral intensity. That's why he went after the Jews. You can't kill God, but you can kill the people of God. I think he and the Jews agreed on one thing, that they are the people of God. And if Hitler hadn't believed that, why would he have bothered? They were just another community in Germany. And it contributed tremendously to Germany and its prosperity and its cultural standing in the world. And he just decided they have to all be slaughtered. Why? I think he took seriously that he was, in some sense, the Antichrist, in the sense that he was to overthrow the kingdom of Christ, which the Jews, he said, had imposed on Western manhood. They had sold the worship of a Jewish carpenter, gentle and meek and humble, to Nordic manhood, which is strong and powerful and worshipped Odin, the god of war. And the result was the effeminization of Western manhood, and which for Hitler is a terrible thing. He was, of course, a misogynist among everything else horrible. And the Jews were blamed for it. So he went after them. And had he won the war and killed all the Jews, the Catholic Church would have been next. Because Jews and Christians know that Hitler isn't king, God is king. And that's why the Nazis and the communists always go after people of Judeo-Christian faith, because we know that their posturing and blustering is just a lot of blasphemy. It's like Pharaoh claiming to be God. So I hope that's an answer to your question. Yes, sir, question.
Okay, at the time when Matthew was writing
Yes, indeed. Yes. He, on one level, this is called the Jewish Christian gospel because he's going after Jews who haven't joined up yet, and he's assuring those who have that they did the right thing, that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. And that's why he's endlessly quoting the Old Testament to prove it. We'll see a quote in a few minutes. So that's his double Jewish audience, the Jews who are already Christians and those he wants to become Christians. And for him, it is a passionate cause, because it's not some of my best friends are Jews and I want them to be saved. My mother, my father, my sister, my brother, the people closest to me. I'm in agony that they don't see what I see. I go to dialysis 3 times a week, and there's a new nurse there, and I listen to music while I'm lying there. It makes the 4 hours go by. And when I was in college, I discovered a group called the Statesman Quartet. It's what's called by some people jumping Jesus music. It's very upbeat gospel music, white gospel, very different from black gospel, because the whole Christian religion can be found in the verses. It's Christian poetry talking about the life of Christ and the redemption, but it's set to very happy music. There are mansions high, there are mansions wide, way up in glory land. There are mansions built of jasper, of wondrous beauty grand. There's a mansion all prepared for me, 'tis built by hands divine. But I know my mother's mansion is higher than mine. And then the choir comes. Yes, I know my mother's mansion is higher than mine. It's wonderful stuff. My dog and I used to dance around the living room because they have everybody will be happy over there, everybody will be happy over there, and we'll be happy over there. We'll shout and yell and scream and yell and never no despair. Everybody will be happy over there. Everybody will be happy over there. Yes, it was wonderful. And I could listen to that stuff for 4 hours. Well, the new nurse said, "You're listening to gospel music." Yes, I am. She said, "Well, I'm a Baptist." And we talked for a half hour there. She's sitting next to me and talking about how she's saved and how her father was a minister and her husband was a minister, and she was raised with the Statesman Quartet and all these. She knows all the gospel groups that I know, and I love so many of them. And I think the poor woman thinks I'm a Baptist. And I'm not sure, since she is a fundamentalist Baptist, that if I break the terrible news to her that I'm a Jew, she'll say, "Well, are you a Messianic Jew?" And I'll say, "Well, I'm a traditional conservative Jew. And I love God and I love Jesus. But I believe that you can come to God the Father directly without invoking Jesus. For Christians, it's fine to do that, but Jews can do it too, and it's legitimate. And our covenant wasn't broken when we didn't accept Jesus as Messiah. We see him as a great teacher and prophet, but not the Messiah, because Jews believed that the Messiah was to create a perfect world, and he didn't. Well, when he comes back and does it, fine, but not yet. But see, that's very complicated. That I'm not looking forward to the moment when I'm going to have to break the news. Now, and I said to, pardon me? Yeah, she'll think I'm not saved. And it's, pardon me?
Tell her you are.
Say again?
Tell her that you are saved.
Well, I can't say, a Jew or a Catholic can't say that. Only an evangelical Christian can say it. I don't know if I'm saved. I know I have a relationship with God, and if that's salvation, fine. But what she means by salvation is, do I have it in the sufficiently correct way to get to heaven? And no Jew or Catholic can, within the confines of their faith, say that. We don't know if we're saved or not in that sense. An evangelical Christian can say it because they're assured that despite their sins, they have been saved by the blood of Christ already. But in a sense, before they were born, they were saved. So all you have to do is accept what Christ has done for you, and then you're saved. Well, that's not true in Catholicism, which has the sacramental system. You have to keep the sacraments. You can be cut off and excommunicated. You can you commit a mortal sin if you don't go to Mass. So are you saved or not? It's an open question. And for Jews, it's also an open question. You do what you can and you keep doing it, but we're not there yet. For an evangelical, in a sense, the salvation has preceded even their birth. Yes?
Someone who comes to our Bible study, who's not here today, Jim Brumby, said that when they lived in Kentucky or Tennessee, I'm not sure which, would be pounced upon by evangelicals, and they were told to say, I have been saved, I am being saved, and I expect to be saved, and they have no answer whatsoever.
The answer that I gave once, and I think I've shared it with you, before computers, the golden age, we used to do registration in the gymnasium, as they did in most universities. And I was in the religion department, and I was rushing back and forth with scraps of paper and forms to fill out between the gym and our office. And every time I crossed the quadrangle, the grassy lawn, a guy would grab me and say, do you know Jesus Christ? And I would shake myself loose and go on with my business. But finally, the 10th time, because he didn't even see me, he saw my soul. He wanted that soul. And he said, do you know Jesus Christ? I said, I know his father, and the rest of the family doesn't interest me. And I think he's still standing there with his mouth hanging open. So, but see, it's hard for me. If I were an atheist, it would be easy. But I'm trying to say, I do try to live my life with God. But in Judaism, it's a direct relationship, and the intermediation of Christ is just not part of the relationship. So I appreciate Christianity, attend church, and do all of that. But in my personal religious life, it's that I'm only allowed to pray to God the Father as a Jew. Now, the rabbis say Christians are perfectly entitled to pray to Jesus or even to Mary, because it's a different understanding. Because what they mean by Jesus is the human face of God. And that's fine. The difference is not that great between the two faiths, but the symbols are different. And so on the surface it seems different. Have I addressed your question? No. All right, now, so don't worry. Faith means trust in God's providence to take care of your earthly needs. And he talks about Gentiles. Now he's knocking not the Jews but the Gentiles, who are focused so much on physical things that they have no sense of spirituality. And indeed, Gentile religion was a very primitive kind of thing, of reading entrails of animals and telling fortunes and all of that. But strive first for the kingdom of God, he adds, and his righteousness, because the Jewish stress of this, remember I've said it's the most anti-Jewish of the synoptic gospels, because he's always knocking the Jews for not seeing the truth of Jesus that he sees, but he's always putting in his own Jewish understanding that righteousness is prior to salvation, as opposed to Paul. So he adds the kingdom of God and his righteousness, which Mark did not put in, and Luke, the Greek, the Gentile Christian, doesn't put in either. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Wonderful admonition. Wonderful. And so true. Don't worry. Scarlett O'Hara said the same thing. I'll think about that tomorrow. Now, on judging, the 10th admonition of the Sermon on the Mount. Well, it's poetic. Judge not that ye be not judged. This is less poetic, but more comprehensible, they think. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. We've lost the poetry, but we have the same meaning. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And Matthew stresses this. How you treat others is the way God's going to treat you. If you, and he gives, there are parables we'll get to. If you won't forgive the debts of others to you, why would God forgive the debts of you to him in terms of what you owe him as your father and your king? So you be merciful to others and God will be merciful to you. And this, the measure you give will be the measure you get. And now hypocrisy, a very important thing that annoys Jesus tremendously. The self-righteous people, the hypocrites, Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not see the log in your own eye? Well, it's a very awkward image. I mean, who can get a log in their eye? But it means that you're doing things worse than the fellow you're admonishing. Look to yourself. Worry about your own problems. Try to fix them, your piety, your ethics, your morality. And let the other guy do what he wants to do. And of course, in extremis, you can say, stop doing that. That's not the way a decent person acts. But you only have control over yourself. So focus on yourself and try to perfect yourself. The great line by Theodore Roethke, after T.S. Eliot's death, I think the greatest American poet is Theodore Roethke, R-O-E-T-H-K-E. Wonderful poet. And he said, I fear those shadows most that start from my own feet. Isn't that great? I fear those shadows most that start from my own feet. What we see in others that we don't like is often an extension of ourselves. And we don't want to admonish ourselves and find fault with ourselves, so we find fault in the other. But the real fear is our failings. Focus on those. Don't be a hypocrite. Verse 5, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, fix your own failures, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. After you really labor to help yourself, you'll be much more understanding of the struggle other people have, and be kinder and more understanding to them. And now, the however that we've been talking about so much, Matthew 7:6. He's given us 10 admonitions of how to live a good Christian life. And then he says, but remember, it's true for the people in the community. Do not give what is holy to dogs. Now, elsewhere, he compares non-Jews to dogs. In the famous episode, which makes Christians today very uneasy, he said a woman, a Syrophoenician woman, that Matthew changes for some reason to a Canaanite woman, maybe because the Canaanites were the ancient enemies of the Jews, runs up to Jesus and says, heal my daughter, she's so sick. And the woman is beside herself with grief and despair. And she grabs onto Jesus, and he says, I'm not going to give what is for the children, meaning the Jews, to dogs, Gentiles. And she says brilliantly and quickly, but aren't the dogs entitled to the scraps that fall from the children's table? And he says, because you said that, because of your eloquence and your care for your daughter has been cured. He cures very few Gentiles. 1, 2, 3. I think only 3 in Matthew. But there may be more generalized, but only 3 specific ones. He's here for the Jews, the lost sheep of the flock of Israel. He tells his disciples when he sends them out, go nowhere among the Gentiles. Go to the lost sheep of the flock of Israel. So Gentiles are compared to dogs here and in that saying of Jesus that makes us so uneasy. How could Jesus, the lover of all mankind, humankind, say that? Well, he was also a Galilean Jew. And in Galilee, where most of the people were no longer Jewish, there was a tremendous conflict between Jews and Gentiles. And they didn't like each other at all. The most anti-Semitic man I ever met came from Miami Beach, where he's surrounded by Jews. When you feel overwhelmed by a population that is other, that's when you turn on them. That's why Trump is playing to all of this terrible fear of white people that maybe we're not going to be the majority anymore. And that people are in despair and then desperation over this, and they give him their vote. So Jesus is a Galilean Jew, and he's typical in some ways of Galilean Jews. I know it sounds peculiar to say this, but I say it as a historian. The Galilean Jews were not big on the law. It's just Jerusalem Jews were intense for the law. That was the Pharisee stronghold. Sadducees too, but the Pharisees, the rabbis, really Jerusalem's the holy city, and the law must be obeyed every jot and tittle. And Jesus argues always over almost always over not the ethical law, where he's more intense than they are. Can't even look at a woman with lust in your heart. But on the ritual law, he's relaxed. And that's what the Galilean Jews were. They relaxed the ritual law, but they hated Gentiles who were moving in on their holy territory. It's like the Jews and the Palestinians today. Terrible, terrible, I hope not a hopeless situation, but so depressing, the way they talk about each other. When I spend time in my aunt's house, she lives in Israel, my uncle, a native-born Israeli, would talk about Palestinians the way people in the Deep South used to talk about black people. It was just disturbing. And somebody said to me the other day, a very Zionist Jew, pro-Israel Jew, said, those Arabs are animals. Remember, this church said that to me at tea time yesterday too, and I said, no, you should be ashamed to say such a thing. That's why those riots at those Trump rallies are so depressing. I didn't think this would come to America, and now it has. And people out of despair and desperation turn on each other. And this precious thing we have, the pearl of great price, Jesus is right, is our relationship with God. But it's also America. What we have here is so precious and so rare. And if I see it slipping away with all this hatred and anger, and it's got to be resisted. Hillary, who I never thought I'd ever say anything nice about, said something in a speech today or yesterday and calling Trump out for exactly what he is. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, when you speak of the Galilean Jews, how would they be carrying on their religious practices just from tradition?
It would be Jewish, recognizable Jewish practice, but like what we have today are conservative and Reformed Jews. Most Jews are not Orthodox. So I now turn lights on. Obviously, didn't have lamps in those days. But I'm a cafeteria Jew. I admit it. That's what we all are, if we would admit it. What is it? You know what that means. A cafeteria Catholic is a Catholic who says, like you go to the cafeteria, and you go to the table with your plate and you say, well, I want the beets. Pickles? No, I don't want the pickles. I'll take the tomatoes, but I don't want the onions. You pick and choose. I'm a Catholic. I want to go to Mass and go to communion, but I want to practice family planning in my home and decide how many children I'm going to have and when. Or I don't think it's important whether I eat meat on Friday or not, but I want to do some other thing. So we pick and we choose, and the Galilean Jews were cafeteria Jews who did some of the Jewish stuff and not others. In Jerusalem, that would have been a very difficult thing. And even today in Israel, in Jerusalem, the number of Orthodox Jews is becoming overwhelming, and the buses don't run, and the public services are cut off. That's not true in Tel Aviv, which is a more secular city, like a modern European or American city. But Jerusalem's a very different kind of place. You have a big gay community in Tel Aviv, but they tried to have a gay pride parade in Jerusalem, and it was broken up by Orthodox fanatics throwing rocks. One person, I think, was killed, stabbed by this Orthodox nut who thought he was doing God's will by killing deviants. Well, it's when John, in John's Gospel, which we'll study someday, the last of the Gospels, maybe written in the early 2nd century, says Jews. The name Jews is used in John's Gospels as a dirty word. It doesn't mean Jews, people of Jewish faith. It means Judeans, hoi Judeoi. It has a double meaning. The word Jew means a Judean, somebody from Jerusalem, the area around Jerusalem. But today it's been expanded to mean anyone who follows the Jewish religion. But for John, we can understand him better if we understand he's denouncing the Jerusalem Jewish establishment. So when he says, Jesus said to the Jews, which is ridiculous because Jesus is Jewish, it would be somebody coming in here and saying, Michael Cogan is addressing the Americans, which is crazy since I'm an American. Or they shut the doors for fear of the Jews when all the disciples in the room are Jewish. It means the authorities in the area of Judea geographically. So what he means is a Judean geographically rather than a Jew religiously. So it's, well, that wasn't responding to your question, but I think I did before. Okay. If anytime I don't answer a question, tell me, because I want to be clear. Above all things here, I want to be clear. I want you to be comfortable with this text. So for the rest of your life, you open it up and you say, I can tell you what that means because I know what the context is. The man who did the reading yesterday, the Old Testament reading from Isaiah, who is a pillar of this church, came up to me when everyone's exchanging the peace and saying, the peace of the Lord be with you. He came and he said, I didn't understand what I read. Can you explain it to me? And then during tea time, we spent 40 minutes on it. Isaiah is saying, remember the Exodus from Egypt. Now forget it, because I'm going to do a new Exodus. Only new things. Forget all the old things. Well, what does that mean in this church in the 21st century? Nothing, unless you explain it. But Isaiah wrote that as the Jews were about to be liberated from bondage in the 50 years captivity in Babylon. And God is saying, don't talk about the Exodus from Egypt, talk about the new Exodus, which I'm going to lead you from Babylon back to Jerusalem in a new Exodus, in a grand procession across the desert. Not across the sea this time, but across the desert. And that's, if you know the context of it, it makes perfect sense. But you've got to know the context. And that's true. The problem with Christian worship, in my opinion, if I may say so, is you read the Bible, it takes 2 minutes, no one explains the text, and then we go on with our worship service, which can be very meaningful. But in the Jewish service, I'm not doing one-upmanship here, it's a 3-hour service, and the central hour is people sitting with their Bibles, with the Hebrew here and the English here, and they read every verse of a big chunk. And then the rabbi spent another half hour explaining exactly what all this means. And he's just touching the surface. But we're used to 3-hour services. And
Traditionally, Christian sermon.
yes, it's supposed to explain, but it does explain one line or so, but it's very inadequate. That's why we have a class here. That's what we're doing. Schleiermacher, the great founder of Christian liberalism, Protestant liberalism in 1800, said there's always a church within a church. This class is the church within a church. For you, 5 minutes of Bible on Sunday isn't enough. You want to really get into it. And that's the church within the church. All right, so the however thing is, this teaching is not for pagans, it is for people in the holy community. Matthew 7, summation. To sum up, everything's carefully structured here. He gave us 10 admonitions, like 10 commandments. This is the new Moses.